Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation as part of the ABA LTRC Industry Insight webinar series. The topic this time is best practices for retaining more clients. Our panelists today are Chelsea Langen, VP of Sales at Martindale-Nolo, Mark Shepard, President of Engage Live Chat, Austin Andrukaitis, President of Attorneys ASAP, and Joshua Eystone, SSDI attorney at Hurd & Smith and co-founder of the SSDI Intake Call Center. The Industry Insight webinar series is hosted by the ABA Legal Technology Resource Center. To stay updated on upcoming webinars or view previous videos, visit ambar.org/industryinsight. You can also stay updated on legal technology news through our blog, www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll now begin the webinar.
Hello again, everybody. My name is Chelsea Langen. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Operations for Martindale-Nolo. The purpose of this webinar is to provide you with best practices and real-life examples to help you retain more clients after you generate their initial inquiry. We've got some great data to share with you from multiple surveys, as well as detailed information on improving your sales cycle from our wonderful panel members who use these techniques on a daily basis. So I'd like to start by providing a brief overview of our company. Martindale, Hubbell, and Nolo have teamed up to form Martindale-Nolo, and we provide a comprehensive marketing solution for legal professionals. Together, we provide exposure to 15 million consumers and businesses looking for legal services, and we generate over 100,000 leads each month. We offer a range of marketing options that include lead generation programs across 55 practice areas, website design and hosting services, as well as a suite of options for directory listings on lawyers.com, martindale.com, and nolo.com. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Law firm marketing is comprised of many elements and stages and should include strategies for not just generating leads, but also managing and working those leads so they eventually become paying clients. And today, while we're focusing on how to retain more of these clients from your marketing efforts, I'd like to start with an overview of what the legal marketing universe looks like and kind of what that means for you. Today, it's virtually impossible to grow your law firm organically through referrals or word of mouth, and a law firm must participate in online marketing efforts for business development. And so to demonstrate the importance of the internet in generating new clients, I wanted to share some data with you. 76% of consumers search for an attorney online. That's a huge number. And each month there's 110 million searches related to legal matters, and there's 1.3 million attorneys competing for that business using various online marketing efforts like search engine optimization, which is often referred to as SEO, search engine marketing, also called SEM, PPC or pay-per-click. There's lead generation programs, directory, social media sites like Facebook, LinkedIn, blogs, and many more. So unlike the days when we were heavily reliant on the yellow pages to advertise, there's now many options to help get your firm noticed, but really, kind of which one performs the best. To find out, we asked 300 of our attorney customers, and as you can see here, the top 3 results were lead generation, SEO, and SEM. Now, I do want to stress that the results can vary by law firm, and it's important to know that you should diversify your marketing channels to ensure that you're maximizing your exposure to potential clients. And additionally, these aren't set it and forget it strategies. You're going to want to make sure that you track and adjust your spend based on each channel's performance. And we're going to spend some time on how to measure those results a little bit later in the webinar. Okay, so what do you do once you generate the prospective client's initial request? This can often be the most challenging aspect of marketing for many law firms. You're going to want to track multiple data points, and as I mentioned earlier, use those to refine your marketing efforts. So let's start with some best practices and kind of define what the sales cycle strategies are. We touched on how to generate the initial request in our previous webinar, but to recap, an initial request is basically generating the prospective client's interest through efforts like lead generation services, SEO, SEM, and others. Initial contact is your first attempt at connecting with the prospective client, and this is really your chance to make a great first impression. Nurturing engagement means following up with the prospective client if they're unresponsive to your initial outreach. And this can be a manual process or an automated one. However, you need to have a system in place that nurtures the lead through your sales process. Intake is gathering the important case information beyond just a name and a phone number to help you evaluate case worthiness. Intake is generally standardized, and what that means is your process is the same regardless of the source of the lead. So a prospective client inquiry generated from a lead generation company is followed up the same way as an inquiry from your own website. I'd also like to point out there's some great free resources on many state bar websites that provide helpful resources on law practice management, including some sample intake forms that you can then customize to fit your unique firm needs. And finally, we have closing, which is really the goal and why clients retain you as their counsel. We're going to provide some additional detail on the initial contact, nurturing engagement, and intake segments shortly. To give you an idea of how important initial contact is, 20% of consumers who submit a lead on a Martindale-Nolo network website hire an attorney within 7 days of submitting a lead. This really demonstrates the importance of a quick initial response and being persistent with your follow-up engagement process to ensure that you have the best chance for retaining a client. Our white paper results showed that 36.8% of respondents respond to a lead within 15 minutes. This is really impressive considering a large percentage of the respondents were also solo and small practitioners. And almost 34% respond within an hour. It's important to note that being the first to connect with a potential client doesn't really guarantee that you're going to be the one to retain that client. However, it does help create a favorable first impression. And don't feel like that you'll be unsuccessful if you can't respond within minutes. Your initial response can, it can be something as simple as an email or a text message if you're unable to call them directly. I think this is actually a great time to hold a quick survey to see if these averages hold true today. So if you wouldn't mind, you'll see a survey pop up under the Q&A section in the GoToWebinar navigation panel. Let us know, how quickly do you respond to a client inquiry? We're going to go ahead and share the results, as Chelsea mentioned earlier, a little later in our segment. But again, how quickly do you respond to the inquiry? Are you responding in, within 15 minutes, 15 minutes to an hour, 2 to 4 hours, within 1 day, or 1 day or later? All right, let's go ahead and continue here and kind of focus on follow-up. So if the prospective client is unresponsive to your initial outreach, you move into what we call the nurturing engagement process, and this is where you're going to reach out using multiple methods that can include phone and email. Some people are using text today, direct mail, etc. And while each firm is going to have their own approach to this in terms of what type, how often, how many times they attempt to connect with their intake process. Another data point from our white paper shows that most firms are contacting every lead at least 2 to 3 times. Most of the law firms, however, that I work with attempt at least 5 to 7 outreaches, and really only after weeks of unsuccessful attempts do they consider a lead unreachable. And Josh and Austin are going to be providing some great real-life examples around nurturing and intake shortly. I'd also like to stress that you should follow up on all leads. Don't rely solely on the information collected on the lead form. That information on the inquiry may not really tell the full story. I think I'd like to do another poll here and kind of, see if these numbers hold true for the webinar attendees. How many times do you attempt to connect with a prospective client before you consider them unreachable? Is it 1 time, 2 to 3 times, 4 to 6 times, 7 to 10 times, or more than 10 times? Again, you'll see a survey pop up under the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar navigation. And if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to respond, and again, we'll share those with you a little bit later on in the webinar. All right, thank you for your time, everybody. And again, I apologize, we had a little bit of a hiccup. I'm now going to turn it over to Mark Shepard of Engage Live Chat, who's going to talk about technology for engagement. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Chelsea. So yeah, I'm the president of Engage Live Chat. We focus on putting the live chat service on legal websites. We have engaged on over 5,000 legal websites currently. The live chat feature, it's new, it's interactive, it's fancy, all that stuff is fine. But the real reason we exist is just because we're able to get more total leads out of the firm's existing website. And so we've handled over 1 million legal chats to date, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about the different technologies for engagement. So here's a slide from a Martindale study. This basically asked which of the following communication methods does your firm use to make contact with an online prospect. Phone and email are obviously the highest percentages here, but in my experience, I've noticed a few issues that firms have with these methods sometimes. With phone numbers, for example, there's a study that said about 18% of firms did not have a phone number visible on their website without scrolling down the page. And then also 7% of firms did not have a phone number on their homepage at all. So I'd say check your site. If you see that issue, go ahead and make your phone number as big as possible and make sure that those prospects have no problem contacting your firm. A different study with the phone calls said 73% of firms had no means of answering phone calls outside of business hours. So what I would do if I'm a firm hearing that is I'd put myself in the minority and either have our firm set up a way of getting contacted after hours or signing up with one of the after hours phone answering services. A good way to also check your current phone and email systems is basically just either secret shop yourself, your own law firm, or use a third party to secret shop your firm and make sure your intake team is as solid as you hope they are. The third option here is text messaging. I mean, I think we all know that text is growing. No one really listens to voicemails anymore. No one has a home phone number, really. So if you've tried phone and email a few times like Chelsea was describing and you can't get a hold of them, shoot them a text and see if you can get some sort of response. It's a lot more convenient, and I think you will snag a few more prospects that might not have otherwise responded. We've integrated with that a little bit with the chat. So this says 5%, and we're seeing it obviously increase in usage. So the next slide, why is engagement important? Specifically live chat. So basically the live chat service, it's all about being proactive. So the average visitor is checking out an average of 4.5 legal websites before they actually reach out to one and contact one. So what we're doing with the chat service is hopefully engaging that visitor in a chat conversation before they would have otherwise left your site without ever contacting you. So to give you guys an example of how effective this can be, on the Martindale site, which was chapter7.com, a bankruptcy site, we did a quick test. Basically, before Engage, they just had 38 total leads, which were all contact forms. Once we added the live chat in the mix, we got 88 total leads. So 60 of those were now chat leads and 28 were contact forms. So you'll notice the contact forms went down a little bit. I call that cannibalization, basically, because now you're having people chat that would have contacted you otherwise. That's going to happen. That part sucks. But in the grand scheme of things, you're going to get more total leads because of the proactive chat feature. So the next slide, how live chat works, it's pretty simple. Basically, the way it's set up, we add a custom piece of code to your existing website, and then we actually have secretaries that monitor those chats for you 24/7. The key here is that they're never going to offer any kind of specific legal advice. They're also not following like a firm script that sounds robotic. What you'll see is they're kind of following more of a formula. Basically, that formula is based around asking some open-ended questions. So essentially the operator will learn a little bit about the basic facts of the visitor's potential case. We'll essentially warm them up to the point where they're ready to take the next step, which is talking to you or a member of the firm. We'll get their contact info, and then as soon as the chat's done, we'll deliver that email. It's basically a transcript directly to your firm for follow-up. We can also do a feature, what we call a live transfer, which is basically connecting that visitor over the phone while they're still engaged in the chat. So on the next slide, this will give you an idea of basically what the chat looks like. You obviously have the button on the left side in the corner there. The whole idea behind live chat is, you know, the firm is spending all kinds of time, money, and energy driving people to the site. The problem with that is the majority of those visitors never contact the firm. So what we're trying to do with the chat is basically just engage some of those visitors in a conversation before they would have otherwise left. You'll see on the next slide, after the visitor's been browsing for a little bit, the chat invitation will appear. It's basically kind of like walking into a department store. So you don't want it to pop up right away, but after they've been browsing around for a little bit, it might be nice for someone to ask them if they need any help. They can click no and continue doing what they were doing, or they can click yes, and that'll interact them with one of our chat operators instantaneously. So you'll see here in the chat conversation, they asked, can you help me, basically. Rebecca's going to respond with an open-ended question. So we may be able to help you with that. Do you mind explaining your situation in a bit more detail? This final slide is basically displaying what the chat looks like on mobile. This is kind of a cross between the text messaging I was referencing earlier. So you have the chat invitation that shows up a little bit differently. It's almost like a notification or a text. They can click no and continue in doing what they were doing, or they can click yes, and then it engages them in a conversation where it's back and forth in real time with the operator, almost like texting back and forth. We're seeing about 40 to 50% of the chat conversations now coming from text, and that's only growing. So that's a big part of the live chat feature now. So that's all I have for the technology for engagement. I think Chelsea will now be introducing Austin and Josh for the panel discussion.
Great, thanks, Mark. That was very informative. I think I'd like to switch things up a bit and move on to more of a panel discussion and give Austin and Josh a chance to share their knowledge. Austin, if you wouldn't mind starting off with introducing yourself and your organization, and then Josh, please follow.
How you doing? I'm Austin Andrikaitis, the founder of Attorney ASAP and marketing director of KEL Attorneys. KEL Attorneys is a full-service law firm with over 12 offices throughout Florida. I've helped generate over 100,000 legal leads, which have turned into about 20,000 cases.
Great. And Josh?
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Eystone. I'm a disability lawyer in a high-volume national practice. We're a fee-capped, low-margin practice area, so it makes us heavily reliant on IT and systems to operate efficiently. Intake for us has become a strength, has allowed us to grow in a competitive market, and so now we're starting to work with other firms as well, doing intakes for other disability firms. So look forward to sharing with you today some intake best practices.
Great. All right, so let's move on to the next cycle in the sales process and focus on intake. Josh, can you tell us what intake is and really kind of how you define it?
Sure. For us, I'd say the core intake function is the screening of potential clients to ID new clients against the firm's intake criteria. But beyond the main or core goal, there's also an opportunity for intake staff to add value to each lead during an intake call, so more value can eventually be extracted from those leads. In some cases, by producing referrals for other practice areas. For us, a disability firm, we produce leads for veterans, LTD, mass tort, and so also for future getting back to those folks. Some folks, it might not be a good opportunity now, but it could be 3 months from now or a year from now. So in addition to the screening of new clients, also trying to add value in each call.
Great. And Austin, can you, would you mind following up and tell us why intake is important?
Yeah, so intake's important because it's your first real interaction with the potential client, and you have the first chance to vet out the potential legal matter that they're presenting in front of you. So, it's important to spend time with the potential client on the phone to gather all the relevant information about the potential case, because not only can you generate a lead for whatever they're inquiring about, it might come for PI or mass tort, or you never know what kind of information you're going to pull out of the potential client on that first intake phone call.
Great. So the next question is really for both of you. I know your organizations, you focus on different practice areas. So can you tell us whether intake varies by practice area or lead source? Austin, if you wouldn't mind responding first, and then also remind us which practice areas you focus on, and Josh, please follow up.
Yeah, so typically we treat them the same unless we're generating leads from form fills, or if they're a phone call coming in, they would go directly to an intake paralegal for the conversation. But each area of law has a different standard set of questions we ask to pull out all the information we need to figure out, is this a potential case worth going after? Is there anything here? Is there anything else that we're missing that, maybe this potential client is interested in bankruptcy, but they're also going to do Social Security disability, and, they had just lost their home, so they're a potential candidate for, foreclosure defense.
Great. And Josh?
Yeah, for us, we generally treat most leads the same in terms of the frequency and how often we're attempting to contact them before we give up. One area where it's a little different is in terms of do they know us already, like a warm referral. Those folks are a little bit different than the leads we're getting where people don't know us from Adam. But by and large, it's generally pretty similar for us by practice area. We're predominantly just SSD also, so we don't do a lot of other things.
Okay. And Josh, can you, I guess, just continue and give me an idea of what metrics are you tracking?
Sure. This is well, the core metric from intake is definitely cost per new client acquired, and so there's a lot of elements that lead into that though that we're definitely tracking as well though. So contact rate, the screen rate, the close rate. For us, we're of course looking at quality factors for each new case acquired, which for us is age and geography are pretty important factors. So ultimately, though, you end up with a cost per new client by source or ad campaign. Ultimately, we know cost per new client by each different source, and so with that, we're able to optimize, meaning cut the junk, decrease budget to things that don't produce as well, increase budget to things that produce better. With that, we're able to, of course, get better ROI over time.
Great. Austin, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we take a two-step approach here. So the first initial intake is usually a phone consultation where we're trying to basically set an appointment if there, is some type of action that we can take for the potential client. So we go ahead and say, hey, is this client interested in coming in the office, or is it a firm decline because there's nothing that we can do there? Once we go ahead and set the consultation, it's important to track, are they rescheduling, are they showing up, are they no-shows and not picking up the phone calls, because at the end of the day, once you have all the data, you're going to go ahead and take a look and say, all right, hey, I have 100 reschedules that have happened this month, and that's my potential pipeline for me to call and bring in business with people I've already spoken with.
Right. And, what do you guys use to track the results? Do you have to invest in a sophisticated piece of software, or can, I use something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet? Josh, why don't I go ahead and open this question for you to start?
Sure. For us, with scale of several thousand leads a month and, almost 30 people in an intake team, we definitely are reliant on our CRM or our main software to retain this key data and allow us to report on it through reports. And so spreadsheets potentially would work for some folks, but when you get to scale, you definitely need to have this essentially baked into your system to just happen. So we don't have to take time to generate reports. They just happen. We get emailed every morning with yesterday's results, for example.
Great. Austin, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're just starting out, a spreadsheet's fine as long as you have the parameters that you want to check and you follow and make sure that you update it. A CRM is the best thing to do once you're doing some volume, but you can get away with using a spreadsheet if you're doing, under 10, 20, consultations a month.
Great. And like, what do you do with the metrics? How are you modifying your marketing channels as you alluded to earlier? Austin, do you want to go ahead and take that first?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, you're trying to come up with the cost per acquisition depending on the different sources that you're buying leads from. So once you go ahead and have all the data, you can start to identify and say, hey, source one is generating a ton of leads and consultations, but I haven't really retained any of those clients. So maybe that's something you want to dial it back or even turn off if it's not producing. And then you're going to find sources where you say, hey, I didn't realize, but they only do a couple leads, but each of the leads that they're sending over are signing up for a case. Is there any way I can get more of that? And you can start to expand in those areas.
Great. Okay, why don't, I know we're going to have a lot of additional questions in the Q&A. I'll have some additional questions in terms of follow-up as well. But why don't we go ahead and move on to and talk a little bit about resources. So the last stat I want to show you here is really just to give you an idea of how many employees make up a team of intake staff. Here we can see that 60% or nearly 60% of respondents have between 2 and 5 employees handling the intake. Again, I found these to be pretty impressive considering a large percent of respondents were solo and small law firms. So it's really nice to see them investing in that intake process. And as a follow-up, what do you do if you don't have the resources in-house that you can dedicate to intake? Are there any options available that you might want to outsource that portion of the business to? I know Josh and Austin, you guys both offer those types of resources. So do you want to give me a little bit of information on kind of how that works?
This is Josh. I guess I'll take this first and then leave you, Austin, as well to follow up. But I'd say in terms of when you look at intake and potential to outsource it, you really got to think about how expensive it is to have suboptimal intake in your own team, meaning what's it costing you that cases are getting past you that you should be accepting that you're not accepting. And so when you look at it like that, you definitely find that there are obviously a bottom third and a bottom two-thirds of lawyers and law firms doing intake. And so imagine being able to do intake like a top 10% or a top 5% firm in a month from now, and the difference between the results of a bottom third firm versus a top 5% firm in intake, the value is huge. And so the actual cost of intake outsourced is really just a modest markup over labor, so it's very affordable, especially when you look at it against what it's potentially costing you to do suboptimal intake.
Right. And how do you decide whether or not this is something that you want to outsource or hire in-house? Austin, you want to take that first?
Yeah, I think you're gonna look at the potential of what you're missing out on or what you can improve on. So if there are things, if you're a solo practitioner and it's just yourself and you can pay someone significantly less to take the calls, field them, and get them to you, it probably makes sense for you to go ahead and outsource that, being that you probably earn the most amount of money actually practicing law. So the things that you outsource, are the non-legal matter processes in vetting out the leads. So then when you get the potential client, you're spending the least amount of time to getting the max amount of talking to that client.
Right. And how do you determine, most of the respondents on our survey said that they had somewhere between 2 and 5 employees. Obviously, there are some that have a larger percentage with 10 or more, but how do you know when it's kind of time to take the leap and, look at bringing in dedicated staff and or looking for outsourcing opportunities? Josh, would you mind starting with that one?
Sure. I'd say we are very heavily monitoring campaigns and campaign performance at least a monthly level, if not more frequently than that. And so I'd say you really should be able to deliver month over month progress with campaigns, and campaigns do mature out where there's no longer, the ability to get 5 or 10% better every month. But I'd say be open to sharing notes and benchmarking with peers and colleagues. We participate in a couple industry groups with more than a dozen firms between the two groups. And so when you compare notes and share with colleagues, you're going to find that some people are literally doing this half the price you're doing it for. We do it about 1/3 of the cost of a lot of the colleagues we network with. So if you're willing to go that step and talk to some of your colleagues and peers about what their intakes cost and find that there's still a big opportunity for you despite your best efforts, then that's a huge opportunity to consider going outside of your firm and going to a vendor who's got more experience than you do at this.
Right. And, so another survey that we had kind of talked about who handles the intake, and there was 56.3% of respondents said that they had non-attorneys dedicated to client follow-ups. And of those, 46.7% that they actually had the power to accept work from clients. So how do you try and work through that in terms of how much power do you give that intake resource? Austin, would you mind starting?
Yeah, I think that comes down to what type of volume you're doing. If you're a solo person or not a large law firm, you kind of got to look at it and say, okay, if I'm only acquiring 10 cases a month, can I really afford to pay a full-time employee to sit there and field calls, even though it might only be 10 to 20 calls a month? So understanding what your potential volume or where you kind of max out, and then understanding when it makes sense to actually bring someone in-house to handle this type of stuff. Outsourcing it is always great because if you're doing it for intake, that's what that person does all day. You're not finding someone that is just a legal assistant trying to take these calls. I mean, you have someone that's potentially dialed in and understands exactly what to say, what questions to ask, when and where, and it can improve your process tenfold.
Great, thank you. Well, yeah, it looks like that's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Martindale-Nolo, and thank you all for attending our webinar today as part of the ABA LTRC Industry Insight Series. And thank you so much, Chelsea, Mark, Austin, and Joshua for presenting today.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.